Greetings in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. I'm Andrii Zvorgan, and today we are chatting about peak oil with Iver and Sam Elmer. We're going to start with some introductions. So, I don't know, Sam, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh no! All of a sudden he's muted.
Sam, you're muted. Can you
Sorry.
unmute yourself? Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Hear me now?
Yeah.
So very briefly, I know I came to this live chat through the Peak Oil Facebook group, and I've been interested in peak oil for a number of years now, 2 or 3. First got introduced to the topic by John Michael Greer, and then that really changed my life in terms of how I see the world and how I see where the world's going. So any opportunity to discuss the topic with other people, I'll take that very readily.
Mm-hmm. And whereabouts in the UK are you?
So I currently am moving between London and Gloucestershire, which is a county on the Welsh border for those who aren't familiar with British geography. Mm-hmm. So I kind of move around for work a bit.
Cool. All right. Iver, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. I'm Iver Luffing, and I live in Maine. And I got into peak oil about 22 years ago, maybe. And of course, I had to go through the 7 stages of grief. So I was in denial for a while. And then I kind of came back into it and, really did a lot of reading about it and, got very into peak oil and had an interview on CNN at one point and talked to a Korean TV station. And then a friend of mine and I, over all this time, had been filming. So we made a film called Peak Oil, A Love Story, which is on YouTube. And it was, I thought, okay, I'm really interested in this. They're going to really want to pay attention to what I had to say, etc. And not so much. It went over like a lead balloon. And, as it turned out, the fracking and stuff, they were right. It sort of business as usual continued up until about, last year, around now. And now it really seems like, it's inevitable. And, I get the very cold comfort of saying, I told you so. But
because it's plateauing right now, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's plateauing, but it's also just all the crazy stuff happening. You just realize, like, we couldn't keep, even if, we couldn't keep going up forever. And all the things that are happening are kind of, they're upsetting and it's crazy, but,
Mm-hmm.
Told you so,
Right. Oh, Lilah, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, no, I figured out I went back out because I originally joined on via web and then I downloaded the app. So that took care of the audio issue.
Great.
My name's Lilah. I probably been peak oil aware. God, James Kunstler with End of Suburbia definitely shook me up a little bit. And
when was that?
I think End of Suburbia probably came out in 2006 or 7. I probably got brought to the issue probably through the lens of climate change. It's kind of like the stages of grief. First I see it as a problem, then I see multiple problems, then I see a predicament. And it's been really hard, I think, the last couple of years as well, because I keep on, I have a insatiable curiosity, and the more I dig, the more I realize we're up shit's creek, and it's a problem. I have 3 young children, and just thinking, that every future I keep on trying to figure out how to get towards, it feels like doors keep on closing, unfortunately, and a lot of grief that goes along with it. And one thing to add, I am right now working on a local Think Resilience group through the Post Carbon Institute. That's Richard Heinberg's course. And that's been interesting in and of itself, trying to bring that to the general public.
And where are you located?
I am located in the suburbs of Boston. And I apologize, my camera's off, but I'm walking the dog. So
okay, that's fine.
Squeezing life in.
Yeah. And so I'm Andrii. And I heard about peak oil a while ago, probably 2015 or something. And then, but at the time, our production was still going up, and I was like, "Oh, this is just a conspiracy theory." And then after I think COVID happened, I'm like, "What's going on here?" And then I found out, "Oh, our oil production is going down. Oh, this is one of the symptoms. We've gone into catabolic capitalism, where the system is eating itself." And also I started to read lots of books. Like I listened to lots of books, and I've read about like 800 books, over 800 books now. And a lot of them are nonfiction, and on this theme of both like climate change and peak oil and post transition and spiritual stuff. So yeah. All right. So I wanted to talk about what kind of common misunderstandings do you guys find when you're talking with people about peak oil?
I think for me, the most common one is the assumption that we will transition seamlessly from fossil fuel to renewables, because even people who understand that there are limits on what you can do with oil, there is a limited amount of it, will nonetheless say, "Oh well, we'll just go over to renewables. We'll whirly turbines and solar panels will do the trick." And
Mhm.
yeah, other people can articulate far better than I can why that isn't going to happen, but it's not.
Yeah.
But I think actually, if we were able to, if people accepted that you're not going to be able to maintain society at the same level that we can now, then we could actually start looking, well, what can we do with these turbines, with these things? How can we use them to draw down our modern society? And that was what we could actually be doing. Instead, we just continue acting as if everything's fine, which is not.
Right.
If only you could just transition.
Does anyone want to mention what arguments they use for people that think that we're going to have a renewable transition?
It's mostly, I think, just the amount of resources that you'd need
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
The who's the fellow at the Finnish Geological Survey did a very good analysis of how much raw material it would need to do a full renewable transition. And some things it was tens of thousands of years worth of current annual production.
Right.
You're talking about Simon Michaud's report?
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I will hopefully be interviewing him in the new year.
I should look forward to that.
Yeah.
I don't really argue it very much because I live in Maine, and that's the place that nobody wants these things in their backyard except they don't mind having it in Maine. So there are all these solar farms going in Maine, huge solar farms. So I kind of feel like, well, maybe they'll keep the lights going longer than they would have, and if not, there's an awful lot of solar panels just over the fence. Anyway.
Yeah, well, it'll keep you going for at least 20 years. But I know what I've heard is that basically solar panels have an EROI of 2.5, which isn't quite enough energy. Well, it's not enough energy to sustain human civilization, and it's not enough energy to produce more solar panels.
It's less than for industrial farming.
Yes, exactly. Like wood. Firewood has an EROI of 30, for instance, and hydroelectric has an EROI of 30, and it's believed that you can't maintain, like healthcare, you need a minimum of EROI of 12. And if you want arts and kind of music and stuff, you need an EROI of 14. And I think that, at least in Canada, I'm not sure, but our healthcare system is completely collapsing right now. So I think that might be symptomatic that the EROI, at least in Canada, is dipping below 12.
Yeah, we're getting the same thing over here.
And I think we're relating to Alice Friedman's work. But I'm sort of curious because I try to talk to at least my folks on the conservative side with numbers. And where do we get those EROI numbers from? I mean, I know Alice puts it out, but how is that quantified? I would love if there's some sort of data behind it that we can share.
Well, I know she has a lot of sources in her book, so if you wanted to dig through them, I'm sure there's lots in there. And I have seen many other articles that were saying that the minimum EROI for maintaining an automobile-based economy is 11 or 12. So there's a lot of scientific articles you can get on that topic if you search on scholar.google.com.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I don't claim that any of it's going to work. I'm just saying, I don't know, maybe if they put in a bunch of it, different places here in Maine, and and they were talking about building a new power line that goes from the Great Whale and all those the Hydro Quebec hydro down to Boston. And everybody asked me about it, and I say, well, of course it's an extension cord right to Boston, but if you know how many people live in the Boston area, you realize that if they can keep the lights on longer, it'll be better for us in Maine. Our lights might stay on longer also.
Yeah. Well, how I've heard it described in books is that these like subpar EROI renewables such as wind and solar, they are good for kind of helping with the transition to make it not as sudden. Like you won't just go from burning all this natural gas and fossil fuels to having no electricity at all. You'll at least have solar, and then at least the hydroelectric will be renewable, and then maybe you could make some solar panels with the hydroelectric. I'm just not sure. I haven't heard anyone or seen anyone do that, but it's theoretically possible, I guess.
I don't even know about the bigger picture, but I know that we have one solar panel in the front of our house that runs LED lights and also has 12-volt charging stations for, so you can recharge your phone, and also we listen to the radio on it all the time. So it's basically almost like a little backup generator thing, and it's been running continuously for 20 years now, and
Nice.
We use lead acid batteries, so those are endlessly recyclable. You just take them down to the place and you get a new deep cycle lead acid battery. So it's just a little experiment, but it's an experiment that's been working for a long time.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
And it's good to have at least some source of electricity.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know if you guys want to continue or if we want to try a different question that people rebuttal that people have to.
I wouldn't mind pulling on that thread a little bit more,
Go ahead.
especially since I've been focusing some time on this Think Resilience group and, just trying to think about ways to better help people understand the predicament. And, obviously folks who are attending these, we'll call it, study groups are self-selecting. We've got, authors, teachers, well-educated folks. And what I hear from them, when they listen to Richard Heinberg, and again, I've been studying this probably for 15, 20 years now, but they describe it as drinking from, a fire hose, and when they start thinking about it, they just want to immediately get to the solution, and they're too overwhelmed by what all this data is pointing to. They're like, well, we just need to educate the youth. Oh, we just need to do policy. There's very little ability to reflect back on to this system itself is not sustainable in any way, and anything that's not sustainable will not be sustained.
Right.
And unfortunately, it worries me that, the educated and let's say folks who might be maybe more prone to listen to this are having a hard time digesting it and are coming to the wrong conclusions regardless of the information being provided.
Yeah.
I know, in terms of the renewables, a lot of people seem to think that it's going to be a drop-in-place thing, and then everything else will be as normal, and that's definitely not going to happen because it's nowhere close to enough. But what can, based on my investigation and my research, that the only really viable way is if we go back to the same kind of land planning policies as we had before fossil fuels. So where 90% of people live in rural areas where they're growing their own food, and their own firewood using coppice or pollard yards. And then they sell some of the surplus. And then, say, for instance, you have a hydroelectric plant, and then the hydroelectric plant is, what produces the electricity, and then the blacksmiths and whatever other metalsmiths or whatever can be near there because they could power their welders and their forges and their furnaces off the electricity, and they don't need to burn charcoal, because charcoal requires like huge amounts of forests. Like, you would completely denude your forests if you tried to do industry with charcoal.
I mean, that's how the Roman Empire fell. They basically charcoaled their forests to build out the weaponry for their soldiers.
Yeah, and the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age, it has same thing. They fell because they could no longer make tin for bronze. And as you know, Babylon or Mesopotamia, it used to be called the Fertile Crescent. It used to be covered in forests. All of the trees were covered in forests. All the valleys were covered in forests, and just people cut them all out. And now it's just a salty desert. And the same thing had happened in Roman Empire, except they couldn't do Mesopotamia because it was already a desert. So they did Northern Africa, which was Carthage, and it was the breadbasket of Rome. And as you may know, that's the Sahara now. Well, it was already the Sahara to some extent, but not nearly. Like, it wasn't just dunes. There was savannas there. There was stuff growing there, but they cleared the trees and they plowed it, and so the little soil that was there just washed away, and now it's just sand.
I didn't realize that they'd done that, but it does show the potential for regreening that land if enough willpower was found. But I don't think it is.
Oh yeah. Oh, but that would require like a massive change from now, because right now we're losing forests almost everywhere in the world except China and India. China and India is the only place that actually has tree planting programs. I think Thailand, that there's a few places in Asia that they have tree planting programs, but almost everywhere in the world, forests are being lost, including like Kenya, Uganda, and most of Africa. And of course, Spain and Italy are also starting to turn into deserts as well because of all the deforestation.
Well, it's also, I think, a combination. I mean, I'm a believer in climate change, and I think climate change is happening also. Slowly in places like southern Spain.
So, Iver, here's the vision that you guys are describing. I 100% agree. Kind of deindustrialization, going to maybe agrarian with some limited tech for metallurgy, and I would love some tech in kind of biomimicry if possible. I don't know if we're going to be able to maintain that level of advancement, but what worries me, to be frank, is right now with where we're going with climate, I'm worried that even if we had an aggressive tree planting campaign, the ongoing and continuing deepening of droughts and rivers and waterways drying out, we're likely to see our great forests start to burn away.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I would like to bring up Victor Schauberger. Have you guys heard of him?
Yeah.
He's a famous hydrologist. And so what he kind of discovered was that the trees, they create shade and they lower the evaporation, and they cool down the surface temperature, and they raise the groundwater, they increase the amount of rainfall. So the reason that America and Europe and Africa and all those other places are drying out is because of deforestation.
Yes.
So, yeah, exactly.
Well, even more than that, have you heard about the biotic pump?
Tell us.
The idea of the biotic pump, and I see this in Maine every summer, is the ocean, is a big area, right? And it creates these clouds. And then the clouds go inland and they find a higher place, but they also find places with trees. And when I lived in Central America, there was a Mayan man that said, the trees call the water.
Yes.
Which I thought, oh, what are they talking about? But in fact, they actually do, because the clouds actually hit a place where there's trees, and then it's a wet, moist sort of environment because the trees are transpirating water, sticks there, and the water falls. And you can see it every summer in Maine because the thunderstorms don't really hit on the islands off the coast. They have to really form and then they drop their load of water up from the Gulf of Maine onto the hills and as thunderstorms every afternoon. So I think you need to have, as that Mayan guy said, he said you need to have the trees because the trees do call the water. So
Yes.
I like Andrei's idea of a food forest because, okay, there would be many fewer people, but everybody would be living in a sort of a forested area with gardens in it, which is a very different concept than, big industrial forest, and a very different thing from industrial agriculture. So you kind of have to think of it as almost like a little shire, like the Hobbit lived in, where you have a sort of a wet area that people actually can kind of get some, living off of, but they don't, they're not pushing the environment hard. And that's our problem now is we're pushing it everywhere. I know in Maine, we're chipping up. Basically, they used to just take all the wood and leave the tops in the woods. Now we take the tops out and they grind it up. They call it a tub grinder. They grind it all into biomass. They put it into a ship up in Quebec, up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
Yep.
And it goes to Sweden, it goes to Europe, it goes to places as biomass.
Right.
And you can't do that many times before rocks start poking up through the soil, and you're losing your soil nutrients.
Reminds me of a book I'm reading right now called Green Man. I don't know if anybody's read it. I was at a NOFA conference, which is a farming association for New England, and he's comes from Guatemala, an indigenous man who escaped the war, and he basically there's some really interesting spiritual stories. They talk about the green man who's at one with the forest, and he's basically created a food forest that's highly productive with chickens and multiple crops together. So yeah. I mean, if we could get this dream through, what's unfortunate is just back to culture. How do we bring people on board, or do we wait for things to crash and make our own little bubbles and hope some of these bubbles survive? I don't know.
Well,
if the bubbles are successful, then we can probably expect people to copy them.
Yes,
I think
exactly.
We got to start. I mean, we had a maple sugar house and a maple sugar lot for 20 years here in Maine, and that was definitely a food forest. I mean, it provided heat for our houses and also provided maple syrup in the spring. So I think it's possible to do it in New England and figure out a way to have a sort of a food forest that you can kind of live with and in, even as the world crashes or whatever.
I just wanted to expand on that biotic pump idea because I read kind of a post by an ecologist of the Mesopotamia region, and they were explaining that the Mediterranean, the winds, they're westerly, just like here.
Yep.
And so they would come off the Mediterranean Ocean, and then there's kind of this ridge. It's like Israel has it, and like whatever countries are over there, and then it rains on that ridge. And now if there are trees on that ridge, then they absorb that water into themselves, and then they evaporate the groundwater as well. And then those winds carry that evaporated water, and then it rains into the rest of the valley. And so like by doing this, you can kind of reforest that deserted region, but you have to start where the water is. And then just by having those kinds of trees, eventually you'll reforest the whole Fertile Crescent. And in terms of what you guys were saying in terms of making a pot, and I completely agree that basically the thing we have to do now is we have to set a good example of going out and making our food forests. And right now, the most critical thing is get some land, or get a friend with some land, and then get all of the edible tree species that can grow in your area, and shrubs and things like that, and the useful ones, and start growing them. And then once you have that, then you can expand to other properties. And I actually had a plan for a village, because In India, the average village size is about 300 people. And here in Grey Bruce, because it's pretty cold, we need a lot of wood, but we only have 5 months of summer, for 5 months frost free. So we need 1.2 hectares per person, which is 3 acres. So 360 hectares would be enough for 300 people, which would be a village. And then you could have like a border of thorny shrubs and trees. Because I know one of the common kind of rebuttals that I get, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to grow my food. And then you guys in the city, I don't know what you guys are going to do. You guys are probably going to starve. And they're like, no, what we're going to do is we're going to get guns and we're going to kill you and we're going to take your food. And so I'm like, this is, like, oh no, well, who's going to get food the next year? Right. They're like, we'll turn you into a slave, And so, so I think those thorny borders is very important to kind of keep people from invading you.
It's like a thorny hedgerow.
Yeah, thorny hedgerow.
Do you have hedgerows in America?
Yes. Well, we have like in Maine, it's all woods, so the whole thing's kind of a hedgerow.
Yeah.
Because some hedgerow species like hawthorn and rose hips, you can, those are thorny and you can eat their fruit.
Yes, yes.
Right.
And we have a lot of really good. So I had this plan basically with the food forest. How you make it is there's an adult height for every plant. Like, so black raspberries are 3 meters tall. And so you have to make sure they get enough sunlight. So you have them near the edge. And then like roses are maybe 4 meters tall. And then you have hawthorns and sea buckthorn, and they're like 6 meters tall. And then you can have Osage orange, which are 12 meters tall, and they're considered the barbed wire fence of trees. and then you can have even higher, you can have thorny honey locust, and they have thorns which are 20 to 30 centimeters long, and they can fend off a mastodon, which is a large, like a woolly mammoth. So you'd need a tank to get through like 30 meters of this thorns. So it'll keep your village safe, basically. And all of them have edible fruit.
I mean, I think the village has to have a way of defending itself also. But I think the big thing is, having had a little farm sort of thing, almost nobody else can figure out how to work your farm. That's the thing. You have so many little idiosyncrasies and little things that seem to work after, 20 years of working it that, who else is going to do it, So I think the thing about it, though, is I love your idea of almost like a village, because if you think about, pre-industrial times, there were a lot of little hamlet sort of villages, and they kind of provided a lot of the needs. And, I hate to say it, but I mean, what's it going to be like? I'm rereading some of James Howard Kunstler's World Made by Hand series, and I'm realizing, you're going to have to get back to a kind of a simpler situation. But I like the idea of a situation with more than just, you trying to defend your homestead on the outskirts of civilization.
Your community trying to defend your community.
Yeah, if you have a village of 300 people, then, some roving bandits that are only 50 or 60, they're not going to try to take you.
No. Well, the issue is there's not. I mean, I've been exploring for the last couple of years during COVID. I've had time to visit, different co-housing options. I've looked in Vermont. I've looked in New Hampshire. There's not tons of options. I've considered trying to do one myself, but honestly, the thought of trying to organize and buy property, and do it from scratch, in my mid-40s seems a little daunting. So I'm like, well, maybe I can find a place that's already established that I can feel good about. But, most places are relatively small. There's not, I think a lot of people are starting to figure things out, and there's not a lot of space, people's spaces are already built. So you either got to build new ones, which is probably the right thing to do. The thought of doing it to me is quite exhausting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You've got more scope for it in America, though, than we have here, because land here is so expensive and we've got so little of it compared to what you have. I think
Yeah,
you've got something like a fifth of your population and about a 30th of your land area.
yeah. I did the calculations, and you guys are like significantly over carrying capacity.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Before the Industrial Revolution, we had about 5-6 million people. Now we've got almost 70.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So we're going to have to lose 90% of the population.
somehow. Yeah. Well, I found that usually for people in Europe, I recommend Ireland. It's the only place that's below carrying capacity right now. And you can grow just about anything there. The reason that there's nothing growing there right now is because the Picts, or the native Irish people that live there, there used to be hazelnuts from shore to shore to shore, because that was their staple crop. But then when the English would invade, the Irish would just hide behind their hazelnut shrubs. And then the British couldn't do anything with them. And so they cut down all of the trees, all of the hazelnut shrubs, all of the chestnut trees. And then that's why there's nothing, in order so that the Irish couldn't hide from the British.
I hadn't heard that. I hadn't heard that story.
Oh, yeah.
Although
Yeah.
now then they went over to potatoes.
Yes. Yeah.
And that
because,
worked until the blight came along.
right,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Well, that was not just Ireland. It was a lot of it was up in Scandinavia also. Huge numbers of people. The blight was really bad in Ireland, obviously, and in Scandinavia, though, a lot of people grew potatoes also, and that's a lot of the reasons that a lot of my relatives and people decided to get out. Plus, there was kind of a little downturn around 1840s, 1850s in Sweden and Scandinavia, which was never an easy place to live anyway. But I mean, of course, they came over to here, which is not that different.
I'd have thought that some of the Scandinavian countries would be well below carrying capacity. I mean, Norway's got 6-7 million people.
Sure, they are, but then you got to remember that you're in a place like, if you're in a place like Maine or where Andrii lives, it's cold in the winter. So it's really cold. So you have to, carrying capacity includes, you need at least a half an acre of woodland, to get continuous amounts of wood out of it per person per year. So you think about it, half an acre, that's quite a lot to,
I'd say half a hectare. Half a hectare.
half a hectare
Yeah,
per person?
Yes.
Okay,
I did the calculations based on, if you do a short rotation coppice with willow and alder, then you can get one cord per half acre, one bush cord.
Right.
And then that is equivalent to about 360 liters of diesel in terms of energy.
Right. So
that's for the whole year, all of your cooking, all of your heating needs.
Sure, but 360 liters of diesel, that's what I do. I get about a cord of wood a year, and I got a cord of wood a year off of my wood lot. But the thing about it is that is a lot of, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of energy. So your land has to provide you with that much energy to keep you warm. Then you have to provide yourself with the food, and then you have to provide yourself with your other needs. So I don't think you can do it on less than, like Andrii says, what is it, a hectare and a half?
Yeah. Well, where we have 5 months of growing season, it's 1.2 hectares, which is 3 acres per person.
Yep. 3 acres. Yep.
Yeah. And then because you need a quarter hectare in order just to meet your food needs for a 75 kilo moderately active male for a year, and that's an average yield. So if it's a below average year, you're not going to get enough. So that's why you want to grow, like, say you could do corn, beans, and squash in one quarter, and then around that you can do a food forest with apples and walnuts and pea shrubs. Get you want to make sure you're not just doing fruits. A lot of people make that mistake because fruits are just carbs. You also need protein. And so you need to grow pea shrubs and bean trees. And then you also need fats, especially if you're going to have a winter. Then you need like hazelnuts, and you need like walnuts and pecans.
Those grow very well in hedgerows.
Yes, they do.
I was on holiday in Wales earlier this year, and there's just mountains of hazelnuts everywhere just going to waste. You can just pick them up by the thousand off the road.
Yeah, Yeah, the British Isles used to be covered in hazelnuts, and it was the staple crop before the Romans came. And like I was saying, what the British did to the Irish, actually the Romans did to the British as well. So when the Romans showed up, everyone was hiding behind hazelnut shrubs, and they're like, we can't tax these people if we can't find these people.
Yes.
And so they had to cut down all of the trees, and they were like, okay, we're going to do wheat, because if we do a tuber crop, we can't tell how much like what kind of harvest they're going to have. Whereas wheat, it's above the ground, so the tax collector can be like, okay, you got a good crop this year, so I expect to have, this many kilos of wheat. It was to make things easier for the tax collector. And also wheat, you can't even eat it without the government's cooperation, because you need to get it to a mill, and then you need to grind it. And so it's not a very good crop to grow. Like a lot of the Amish around here, they don't grow very much wheat because they have to mill it, and they don't have mills. And so they do corn and then barley. Traditionally in Britain, they did a lot of barley, and they were also known as the biggest drinkers of beer.
I think we still are bar a couple of countries. The Irish might drink a bit more.
Okay, yeah.
What is your thoughts in regards to animal husbandry? I mean, right now, I'm in the suburbs of Boston. I have chickens, I have compost, and
Great.
but we're considering moving because I don't see prospects are going to be so great here in the next 5-10 years. I don't think anybody on this. That would be a good question. I'd love to know what people think about timing of all of this. Because I've had my tinfoil hat on for years. I remember in 2008, I was convinced we were going over. I just didn't really anticipate shale oil, and I also didn't anticipate the scale of the quantitative easing efforts that went on by the federal government. But I don't know. Maybe there's more, rabbits we can pull out of our hat. I'm not sure.
I don't think so. And the reason I say that, Lilah, is the diesel is already a big problem. It seems like what they do is they kind of keep the gasoline going. I mean, the gasoline is easy enough to keep going because that's kind of like the opiate of the masses or something, just keep everybody driving around. But the diesel problem is a real problem because, the Northeast has all this heating oil. Everybody has heating oil, and diesel moves everything. It moves, like Walmart's warehouse on wheels and stuff. And so, I mean, I could see things falling apart. But the thing about it is I also feel like the bigger places, they're going to try to keep sort of the inner ring suburbs going much longer than everywhere else. I mean, I don't know if it's going to work, but I mean, you kind of think about it, I mean, Maine is already kind of collapsing, always has been since the 1860s. But, they're going to try to keep the sort of the elite all happy and flying and driving. I'm just amazed at how many people are flying still. And you think about it, kerosene is very similar to jet fuel. So basically, every time you fly, you're like, I figured it out the other day, and it upset everybody. But basically, if you do a long haul flight of 3,000 miles there and back, you're basically burning up one person's, heating oil.
Yeah.
I was really proud of France, and I mean, again, they're doing this because they have to, but they just banned short haul flights.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I have a lot of friends who are, all big into climate, but I like to call them champagne liberals, because when I tell them, hey guys, we've got a problem, I'm really not flying much anymore unless I have to for seeing friends, it's just critical flights at this point. They're like, they're almost like, what are you like so doomy for? It's like, well, in their mind, we have a climate emergency, but they don't see any other emergencies. And not only that, they can't equate flying with climate. All they see is, policies. It's like, give me the fixes, but I want to keep my lifestyle. It's very strange.
Yeah.
And
So
here we have, you can get a short haul flight from London to Manchester. That's about 100 miles.
Yeah.
On an airliner. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
But something I would note, I think, was it Iver? I think you were talking about how they would have people in the big cities, the rich people, they would be the ones who would lose their services last. we have kind of the same thing here, not so much with cars, but with trains, because we have a lot more sort of public transport in Britain, I think, than you do in America. Certainly more density of it. And in London, we have really, really good train services, huge amounts of investment in it. Then you go to the rest of the country, particularly the north, almost nothing.
Yeah.
They're spending £100 billion on a fast train, on a high-speed rail to go from London to Birmingham and Manchester, which will shave about half an hour off a 3-hour journey. And they're spending £100 billion on that and nothing on railways in the north, which will benefit lots and lots of people.
So I just wanted to talk on both the animal husbandry. So animals take about 10 times more space per calorie than plants. So these people living in these villages would have a plant-based diet, but I think there would be room, obviously, for some animals like chickens. Though personally, I think that it would be easier to go with wild animals, like say a ruffed grouse is the wild chicken around here, and then like wild turkeys, and then squirrels, and you could do crayfish. They're good in DHA and EPA. And so you could have all of these wild animals, and then you could have some hunters in your group. And then because they will pick off kind of some of your food, and then you need basically people going around with bows and arrows knocking out the squirrels or whatever, or making sure you have enough like fisher habitat, like enough predators to make sure that you can get in a substantial harvest. And in terms of the timing, because I talked to John Peach last week, and then so I double checked with him, and he seemed to think that my timing was fairly reasonable, which was so we're going to continue to being in what's called scarcity industrialism, where we have diminishing oil, like it's going to be like a slow decline for the next 8 to 14 years. And then within the next 14 to 40 years, we're going to have that big dip sometime there, where it won't necessarily be super drastic, but that's when we're going to kind of run out of oil, because they say, well, Alice Friedman said that if the aroid drops below 9, then the whole thing collapses basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's going on at the moment?
12 to
What's
14.
going on at the moment? 12 to 14.
Well, listen, John Peach, he said they continue this line down, and by 2053, there's no oil.
Yeah, if we manage to get every last drop of oil, but it's unlikely we'll be able to get there, because like EROI of 9 is where you're able. So that at that point, education, being able to train your workers becomes impossible. You don't have enough energy to train your workers to work on your oil extraction.
No.
So if you can't pay your workers to extract oil, then it's just they're going to walk off the job.
Like hearing John Peach's talk the other day, I had almost like an epiphany, like learning about peak oil to begin with. I realized, this isn't just, you kind of expect the Hubbard peak that goes up and then kind of comes down. Just finding out about the Seneca Cliff possibility really makes you realize, well, it's a real thing. And then when it happens, it just crashes.
See, but here's like, it's difficult for planning. When we talk about like the suburbs, like within, the suburban wall, they're going to try to keep things going as long as possible.
Sure.
If I were to ignore the ethics of me staying here, but if you were to talk about like selfishly trying to keep yourself protected as long as possible, you might say it might work to stay in the suburbs for a bit.
Yes.
But what to me is very difficult to understand is this downward slope. We're saddled with so much debt right now, and the economy is so fragile that I don't know what's going to break before, which is the EROI going down or the financial bubble popping.
Right.
I think
they're definitely interrelated. And I know
Yeah.
John Michael Greer, his recommendation is move to a small city of like 10 to 20,000 people surrounded by agricultural land. And you want the average population density to be below. I mean, it depends on the carrying capacity of your land, but the carrying capacity here is 80 per kilometer. And Gray County has a population density of 20 per kilometer squared. So we've got plenty of room.
That's why I'm looking basically in Vermont and New Hampshire right now, and that's kind of the what I'm looking for. What worries me a little bit is, picking a house in the middle of nowhere, and then what? I mean, even if I have to drive to a town that's 5 miles away, but I'm suddenly in a little farmstead by myself. It to me doesn't seem very sustainable with just like a small household.
Yeah. So
no.
what people did pre-industrially is church. So I would recommend Mennonites or Amish because they're really good at growing food. So I go to a Mennonite church every other week, and they've all got big fields. They all know how to grow food. So they are the best bet in terms of having a stable food supply. Those are the people you want to know.
Mm-hmm.
Are the
Yeah.
Mennonites and Amish, are they generally self-sufficient?
Yeah.
So 80%.
They sell a lot of their stuff. I mean, they're very smart the way they do things. But I would say, Lilah, I would go to that place, and even if you don't buy a place immediately, you don't know where it's going to be. I would just go there a lot. Like make that your weekend trip. Like we're all going to whatever town you decide to go to, and then really get to know that town. So then some of the people there. You kind of, I wouldn't buy anything immediately. Just kind of get a feel for what makes sense, and then you might even get a little place in that town, in the town itself, and then make sure it's a place with like a garden possibility, etc. You just kind of get a feel for it, because you're right, it might make sense to have a place they kind of almost call a bug out place or something, place you could go to.
Yeah, we haven't figured it out yet, whether it's sort of
Yeah.
like, I mean, we're lucky enough. I mean, my husband and I, we both, I'm a contractor. He works full time. We're, frugal. We've saved like mad. So we have a nest egg, which most people don't. So we're lucky. I'm worried about, what is it? 60% of Americans can't handle, a medical bill of $500,
Yeah.
or living paycheck to paycheck. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's safe for us to be here in the suburbs for the next 5 years. But I don't know.
I'd be ready though, because you know what I think? I thought it was interesting. When they had those big hurricanes down south and different things happened, everybody would get in their car, they get on the interstate, and then they would get stuck in a traffic jam, and they would actually just not go anywhere. They get like 30, 40 miles outside of their city, and then it would be total traffic jam. They'd run out the gas in the vehicle, and that was it. So I was thinking, you kind of have to know a sneaky little way to get out there to wherever it is. And it wouldn't even have to be very far. It's just a little, a place that you can go that's a little further out there. I would say way past Nashua. You want to go past Nashua, New Hampshire. Southern New Hampshire seems kind of full. I would go to I don't know.
Yeah, you want to select a place that is below carrying capacity.
Yeah.
And I was reading a book, and they were saying how, do you know those zombie movies and how all those zombie movies were really popular?
Yeah.
And there's still zombie shows and stuff. And they were saying that this is kind of a subconscious premonition about what the starving hordes of people in the metropolises, because they were saying once the trucks stop going, within 2 weeks, people will quite possibly revert to cannibalism, and then the mega cities will be
I have
very
grandparents
unsafe.
from World War II who had to resort to that.
Yeah,
I mean, that shit is real. People
Yeah, for
had
sure.
to do whatever they could to survive.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually have in my basement. Well, you guys don't know where I live, but I have about 8 months of freeze dried food in my basement.
Yeah.
And,
Very wise.
I probably shouldn't tell you guys, but
Yeah. Well,
They're
the
all,
thing.
yeah, I have some too.
Yeah.
But let me suggest the other thing about big cities is they're right by the ocean.
Yeah.
So the thing about the ocean is, if you can figure out, if you know how to sail, then the second, that's the other thing you could do is your bug out place could be a boat, right? And so if you can get to the boat, you hop in the boat, and then as soon as you're out of Boston Harbor, I mean, like, there's nothing out there. So, you can make it down east. You could go anywhere you needed to go.
Well,
So that's another possibility.
There's piracy.
Oh, no, piracy. Listen, there's going to be piracy, but what I'm saying is, okay, you got to get kind of a fast boat,
Well, and then you'd have to fuel it if you want a fast boat, right? Otherwise, you're on sail.
No.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking catamaran. I mean, catamaran, you can go what? You can go 10, 20 knots. So you can basically,
the wind's blowing.
yeah, but you can outrun a lot of things at 10, 20 knots,
It just I've looked into this whole kind of sailboat idea, and I was really big on it for several years, but then eventually I kind of gave up on it because it's so hard to get enough food, and then like even if you try just like kind of going to the shore and then like getting some food from the shore, what if someone starts living there and then like they shoot you or something? It's it's much better to have land, because like we're kind of a land-based creature and we need to have our plants. We can't subsist off just fish and seaweed because it's too high in protein, and it doesn't have the right combination. We need like a high carb diet in order to be healthy, and that means plants.
Oh, let me just say, I agree with you. But what one thing, the natural conclusion of you can't move anything anymore on land is the only way you're going to be able to move anything is on the ocean. Or not the ocean, but any water body. It could be,
for sure. Yeah.
Georgian Bay, like you could trade all the way across to Michigan. No problem.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be really big with the boats. And somewhere on the Great Lakes, great area, because we're going to be doing a lot of trading over the Great Lakes. Because all the waterways, we can canoe through them, just like we did in pre-industrial times.
Yeah, and I think, that's what happens is it becomes a different place, and you can almost see the way that cities were set up. Like, look at Bangor is at the head of tide. Augusta is at the head of tide. Boston, the reason Boston is there, it's a beautiful port. It's a really nice port. So all of a sudden, these places that became big because of that could become a useful place again. Now, the problem is a place like Boston is overpopulated. So it's not going to be a fun place to sail into. I'd rather sail into, Camden Harbor or something. Pop in, pop out. I wouldn't want to be stuck in a big, decaying industrial port, Anyway, that's what I teach sailing in the summer to kids. So.
Okay. I see where the bias is.
Oh yeah, and I'm a Viking. Vikings. Come on, that's like, got to trade, got to get on the ocean.
Yeah.
So there's the personal. I mean, we're talking about kind of like personal homesteading. Finding your place of safety. In the meanwhile, I mean, I'm very, I'm active on my local sustainability committee, and I'm a pain in their ass because I'm poking holes in some of their stuff. And I mean, right now we're working on a climate action plan for our town, and I'm reading through the warrant, and there's this whole thing on how renewables are, clean, sustainable.
Sure.
And, I'm just so, I used to sell solar panels, and the more you dig into it, the more you understand the scale and the scope of this.
Yeah.
So where do you put your efforts? Because obviously, I mean, when things crash, obviously you're going to bug out and try to survive. But in the meanwhile, I think the more people that become aware of this issue, or, where do we put our energies to support like food coppicing, permaculture, like, what sort of policies, are any of you active at the local and state government level?
Yes, I actually just ran for the legislature in Maine. I didn't make it, but my idea is, I'm 63, almost 64 years old. My idea is teach as much useful skill to people, young people as possible. And don't even worry about teaching them all about peak oil or climate change or whatever. All that stuff is kind of heavy, So I think the idea is to just teach them, okay, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to, coppice a tree, or we're going to, anything we can do, teach them how to sail, etc. I don't even, I'm like Pied Piper. I just want them to kind of have a fun time doing it and learning how to do it. And like I taught a bunch of kids how to do maple syruping over the years we owned it, the maple sugar house, maple sugar bush thing, and how to make a living off of land. And I think personally, that's where I'm putting my effort, because, if it gets bad, it gets bad,
We have.
I run a Scouts program myself, so
Yeah.
and I work with parents, so we teach various programs. So yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left, and then it'll cut off. Sam's back, and so I wanted to mention that I attend the Grey County Council, because I don't know how it works in America, but in Canada the county is in charge of all land allocation, and so I am kind of my main thrust is that we should stop doing any more urban or suburban stuff. That's just all going to be scrapyards later. We need to do sustainable homes, like farmsteads, where people can that are a reasonable size for working with hand tools, so 5 to 10 hectares, and then you could have enough.
You're getting my rub, because I'm feeling a little heartbroken, because that's where I've been for years, and I kind of feel like it's a lost cause. And all my friends are here, and all of the work that we're doing is, kind of being sustainable at the local suburban level. And I just don't see how to be sustainable in any form where we're at. And I'm really torn, because, it would be starting afresh and really uprooting ourselves to kind of the unknown.
Yeah, the only way I can see working is kind of like in those little cities where I was saying, where they can like deliver the food. It has to have enough growing area within 20 kilometers to support everybody that's in the middle. But also, if you use too many horses need to eat too. You need a hectare per horse. That's a lot of land that you could be used for a human. So it's really best to kind of have a transition plan where, say, for instance, in Owen Sound, we've got like 22,000 people in the city. And then we've got like this huge area around of like 55,000 hectares. And we've got to move, let's say, 15,000 people out of the city, and each one is going to have their own farmstead to grow their own food if we want to make kind of the smoothest transition possible. That way you got that 9-to-1 ratio. Yeah.
Then you can expect there to be lots of disputes over who gets which farmstead as well.
Yeah.
My neighbour's got the better one. I want his got.
Well, it would be on a first come first serve, and also on a village basis. So basically, in prehistoric times, there was no real estate market. Basically, if you wanted to move to an area, you would talk to the chief or the village leader or whatever, and then they would talk to their. It's like, okay, can this person live here? And then it's like yay or nay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I personally, I like the idea of sort of finding a place and then checking it out and calling it like your vacation homestead or something, vacation place, but just visit that place as much as possible and get a feel for it. Because, I mean, if you have to jump, you have to jump, so it could be like, you might not even own it or whatever, but you just go visit and so that you're not a total stranger when you show up in town,
Yeah. And plant some trees. Or give them some seedlings to plant, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
We have 1 minute left. Does anyone have any final remarks kind of thing they want to get in before the live stream cuts off?
Well, You can only live one day at a time, so I don't think we should get too maudlin about it all.
Okay.
Just the day we're given.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Okay, so and I think I am hopefully gonna interview Michael Dowd next week, and then we might have another Peak Oil group chat in January.
Yeah, and ideas for topics. I'd love to talk about kind of war and political unrest. Because those are also things that, like, in my mind, I can kind of figure out how to work with, like, less energy and lower, inputs. I don't know how to deal with those pieces, and honestly, the political and the economic fallout worry me more than climate change. Climate change will get us, but it's farther down my list of immediate problems.
I agree.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent topics. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for organizing this, guys.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, you have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Nice meeting
You
you
too.
guys.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you too.
And we'll see you on the Peak Oil group.
All right.